And I think he has some other obligations later in the meeting, so hopefully we'll get the meeting done pretty quickly. So first of all, we'll have the call to order, welcome, and the roll call. And it looks like Trustee McDonald and Trustee Beers and Trustee Dupree are not here, and everyone else is here. And as I indicated, Superintendent Thane is participating telephonically. So number 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if we can stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Oops. And now item number 3 on the agenda is to review, revise, and approve the agenda. And there are a couple of corrections to be made in the agenda. So on page, let me just get to it. On page 43, it's an example of the official ballot. And Pat had kind of a placeholder figure of 805,000 in the middle of the first paragraph, and the actual number is 804,861. So if we can change that number to 804,861. And then if we look on page 46 for the high school, instead of the placeholder of 77,000 with all zeros, it's 77,322. Which changes the approximately 0.41 mils as opposed to 0.40. And then in the next paragraph, it will result in an actual tax of approximately 0.55 as opposed to 0.54. And in the next line by $1.10 instead of $1.08. And then I'm sorry, say that again.
Could you repeat the actual tax?
Sure. The tax is, in the document, it says 0.54 and it's 0.55. And in the next, it's by $1.10 instead of $1.08. Did you get that? And then on page 49, somehow there's a number 2 listed in the middle of the page that says Stegner Field track improvement upgrades, and that somehow just ended up in there, and it shouldn't be there, so if we can just scratch that or delete that out. So there's 1 and 2, but it's really just 1. On page 49, in the middle of the paragraph, it says, regarding the increase in the building reserve levy, the following are school facility projects. And is that everything, Pat?
That's it.
Okay. So is everyone okay with making those modifications to reflect the actual numbers and the actual item that would be covered under the levy? Okay? And you got all those, Elizabeth? Okay. So with those revisions to the agenda, are there any other requests to revise the agenda? Sure. Trustee Decker?
Thanks. It's so tiny, but on page 3, there's just a weird typo that makes it sound as though it says doesn't not impact, and I think we just need in the item 4.
Okay.
Item 8A4. That's all.
And what should it say?
So it does not impact, or doesn't impact, one or the other.
I'm going to walk over and see
Yeah.
what you're doing, 'cause that's
Sorry.
not what we're
To expedite delivery of these items, so it doesn't not impact.
Oh. Good catch.
It's just a typo.
So we have 2 negatives in there. So on page 3 in the background information under item 4, Franklin and Lowell FF&E bid, in the 4th line, at the end of that line, it says, so it doesn't not impact. And so let's just cross out the NT. So it reads, it does not impact. Is that okay? Great catch. Thank you for good proofreading. And did you catch that, Elizabeth? Okay. So with those changes, we'll move ahead with the agenda as it's set then? Any nods around the table? Okay, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes. And so item number 4 are, beginning on page 6, are the Board of Trustees regular meeting from February 28th, 2017. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Moved by trustee Decker and seconded by trustee Wake. Is there any corrections or additions? Any typos? Seeing none, then all those in favor of approving the minutes from the regular meeting of February 28th, 2017, please indicate by raising your hand. And that's unanimous as to all trustees present, and trustee Beers is now here also. Then we move on to public comment, and this is the time for public comment on non-agenda items. What this means is at the beginning and end of every school board meeting, we create an opportunity for the public to comment on any items that we're not going to be discussing that are listed in the agenda, so that you can bring any items to the attention of the board that you think would fall under the jurisdiction of the board and the trustees. It can be any item at all. Because it's a non-agenda item under the Open Meetings Act, we don't discuss it because it hasn't been noticed up to the public, but we will listen to what you have to say, and that's why there's not a dialogue. So if you have any public comments, then please come to the podium and turn on the microphone, because this is all recorded and telecast over MCAT, and say your name, and if you have an unusual spelling of your name, please spell it. And then if you do represent an organization, identify that organization. And we ask you to keep your comments to about 3 minutes. If there's anyone that has any public comment on non-agenda items? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which are reports and announcements. So on page 24 is the Health Insurance Trust Fund Report, and it is the routine Health Insurance Trust Fund Report we see each month for the month of February 20, and that should be 2017 instead of 2107. So I'll make that change too. And the next is 6B, which is announcements from the superintendent. Mark, did you have any announcements you'd like to identify for us?
I certainly do, thank you. First, I apologize for my absence. As you know, we're engaged in a collaboration with the MEA, and so a team of us are in San Francisco for a workshop with the Carnegie Foundation on school improvement networks and the science behind that. So it's a great conference. We're learning a lot. We'll be returning to Missoula tomorrow. With regard to the items that are listed on page 25, a couple that I would highlight for the viewing audience. The week of April 3rd to April 7th, the high schools will be conducting parent-teacher conferences. So there will be no school for students on Friday, April 7th, and the teachers will schedule largely evening conference times to accommodate parent schedules during that week. We will have our regular Board of Trustees meeting Tuesday, April 11th, 6 p.m. in the Business Building. Our second April meeting, which is scheduled for Tuesday, April 25th, will be conducted at Seeley Swan High School, and it'll afford the trustees an opportunity not only to hear about the programming at Seeley Swan, but to also see the results of the bond work. Really excited to have an opportunity to showcase that for the Board of Trustees. We have 2 series of trustee building visits scheduled for April. Friday, April 21st, we'll visit Sentinel and Big Sky High School. And Thursday, April 27th, Willard Alternative High School Program and Hellgate High School. We also have scheduled on Monday, April 24th, Professional Learning Day for all staff, K-12, so students will not be in session. We have a really exciting lineup of professional development opportunities for staff that will be conducted that day. And we're really fortunate to have 2 days like this built into our calendar throughout the school year so that teachers have an opportunity to continue to hone their craft and participate in professional development. So busy month of April, but really looking forward to the activities that we have scheduled.
Anything else?
No, that will conclude my report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And now we move on to item 6C, which are any announcements from any trustees. Any announcements? Trustee Brightstead?
Wrong one, okay. I just wanted to bring attention to something that's going on in the legislature right now, House Bill number 265. This bill involves a universal screener mental health screening tool for school districts. It allows for universal mental health screening. Unfortunately, the bill was pretty much gutted in committee, but I still think that this is a really good idea for our kids and something that the district, I really hope to see the district lead the way on. So I encourage you guys to all read this bill, and yeah, I'd like to see the district actually implement these plans.
Any other announcements from trustees? Seeing none, then we'll move on to item number 7, which is the consent agenda. And just to explain for those who might be watching or in the audience, these are items that are routine items that we see every month, and under our board policy, we can have those placed on the consent agenda, which means that since we see them on a regular basis and they tend to be non-controversial, there won't be a discussion by the trustees as to the items listed in the consent agenda. If any trustee wants to discuss it, then they can ask that the item move off the consent agenda, and then we will have a further discussion on it. But no one has asked for these two items, or the two items on here to be taken off. So I will be asking for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda, and one is to approve the MCPS student attendance agreements, which this is a list of the students requesting to attend other school districts. And the other one that we see on a regular basis is the monthly reports, and for this month, it's the February 2017 revenue and expenditure reports. And so is there a motion to accept or approve the items on the consent agenda? Moved by trustee Wake and seconded by trustee Lorenzen. And as I indicated, the board won't be discussing them because they're on the consent agenda, but if anyone has any public comment? Seeing none, then all trustees in favor of approving the two items on the consent agenda, please indicate by raising your hand. And that is unanimous as to all trustees present. Then we move on to 8A1, which is Smart Schools 2020. And Mark, I didn't know if you had some introductory remarks or if you wanted me to turn it over to Burley directly, whichever you prefer.
You can go straight to Burley.
Okay, Burley, you're on. So this is information only, and it's a report about all the bond projects that are going on.
I don't have a ton of new information to provide you guys from the last board meeting, but I will share with you that we interviewed GCCMs for Cold Springs, which we will discuss here briefly, over the last 2 weeks. And we've also had Washington GCCM, General Contractor Construction Manager. I'm sorry, all these acronyms. They closed on Monday, so we'll be screening those out this Thursday for Washington Middle School. And then also I'd like to throw out an appreciation to Trustee Smith and his day job. Maybe you haven't seen it yet, but we did get information back from the DEQ for the VOAG kitchen, and the permit was approved and will be issued in May. So we'll look at starting rejuvenating that project as well for the summer. So I appreciate Trustee Smith's, like I said, in his day job, his efforts on that, so thank you. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions on any other projects you may have.
Thanks. Any questions for Burley? I just have one, Burley. What's the situation at the track? Are you waiting for warm weather to finish up that project?
Yeah, thank you. So we've been working very closely with Field Turf because, as I mentioned last fall, when we kind of got shut down because of the weather, it's a very temperature-sensitive application. We have 3 layers left which are spray-on layers. They require 55 degrees and climbing, so it's something that we would have to wait for in today's weather, something to probably around noon. Then they like to see that it stays 50 degrees plus once applied for 8 to 10 hours for proper curing. So if it doesn't cure correctly, it bubbles, and then you have to grind it off and kind of start from scratch. So it's a lot of work for nothing. So this is a very quality track. It's going to be the best in the state, so we want to make sure it's done right and correctly. So we have product being delivered back into the district, or back into Missoula on Tuesday. We're going to store it indoors so it stays warm and heated. We'll be using the warehouse and then some heated shops out there at Big Sky High School so they can apply it. They're telling us it applies better when it's warmer, so at above 50-degree temperatures. So we see some 60-degree temperatures coming in the forecast here next week, so we're hopeful that we maybe can start seeing some product go down. The track has been or the track events have been moved and rescheduled at other venues for the month of April at the stadium. So we're hopeful that they can get that stadium done in the month of April. So,
Thanks for that update. Any other questions based on my question? Thanks. And this was information only, but we'd take any public comment if anyone has that comment. Seeing none, then we move on to item 8A2, which is to authorize engagement of a Cold Springs GCCM. And as Burley mentioned, we use a lot of acronyms in education, and so it's the general contractors and contract managers who would be working with the architects that have previously been selected on the Cold Springs construction project. And the recommendation is that the trustees authorize the engagement of Sletton Construction to act as the GCCM for the Cold Springs construction project. And so Burley, if you want to walk us through what that selection process entailed, and then we'll let you give us information, then I'll entertain a motion, and then if there's any board discussion, we can discuss it at that time, okay?
yes, thank you. First, I'd like to thank the committee, because it does take a lot of time and effort. It's important that I thank them. That's Madam Chair Holland, Trustee Lorenzen, Susan Daniels, the principal at Cold Springs, Julie Robitaille, Pat McHugh, and Superintendent Thane. So thank you guys for taking time out of your busy schedules to help with this, as it's a very important process. This process is very lengthy. As I noted, it starts out with a request for qualifications, which is an RFQ. We qualify all applicants, or all applicants, I guess, submittals. And those that qualify get to respond to a request for proposal, an RFP, which is part what they bring to the table, as well as pricing. And so we score the RFP, the pre-construction services, and what they bring to the table, the pricing, and then the four, up to four from that group gets to come back to an interview. We selected four for this project. We brought, and then once the interview's done, it's scored, and all three scores are combined. And that score was Sletton Construction. So, and I'd like to thank Cliff Garnis for coming tonight from Sutton. And we're looking forward to this project.
Any questions for Burley before I entertain a motion? Seeing none, then this is elementary only, so is there a motion from an elementary trustee to, oh, pardon? Oh, okay. Is there a motion to authorize the engagement of Sutton Construction to act as GCCM for Cold Springs, and it's been moved by trustee Lorenzen. Is there a second? Seconded by trustee Decker and Smith. And so is there any board discussion? I'll just make one comment. This is a really exciting project. It's one of the first completely new builds on what they call a green site in Missoula for a number of years. And so a lot of high-quality applicants appeared before the committee, and I think every one of them would be excited to have this job, and it ends up being a pretty strict rubric that results in the person or the entity being selected, but I think it's going to be really exciting and Sletton has worked with the architects in the past, as had others, but it's going to be a great partnership. So I'll just say thank you to Burley too and to Eric and everybody from, I see they're both here. Anyway, it takes a whole group of people to go through that selection process, and it's a very long process. So thanks to everyone who was involved in it, from Hultang and Burley especially too. So that's my comment. Any other comments? Any public comment? Is it okay if I just ask the representative from Sutton to stand up, because I can't see him, and just if you can come to the podium and say your name, that way we'll capture it for the TV audience?
I'm Cliff Garnis with Sletton Construction. I'm the Vice President of the Northern Building Division from Great Falls, and really look forward to this project. It's going to be a great project, so I want to thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, then we have a seconded motion. So all elementary trustees in favor of authorizing the engagement of Sletton Construction to act as the GCCM for Cold Springs, please indicate by raising your hand. That is all elementary trustees present, which is all except trustee McDonald, who's absent at this point. And then we move on to 8A3, which is to approve Franklin Elementary perpetual non-motorized public access easement. And this again is an elementary only action item. So Burley, if you want to provide a little background information, and then I can entertain a motion unless we have some questions for you first before the motion.
Yeah, so the easement starts on page 37, but on page 40, it kind of shows you a picture of what we're referencing. It's if I can find the page, so I can reference it. So it's on the 11th Street side of Franklin, which is the proposed new front entryway. And it's kind of creates a bit of a buffer between the parking and a new sidewalk that kind of infringes onto our property. And this was very similar to the low process that we went through with the parent drop-off, where the sidewalk kind of comes into our property, but the city requires an easement for sidewalks when it comes in on a private property. So this is kind of that documentation to make that official. So I'd answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions? Seeing none, then is there a motion from an elementary trustee to approve the perpetual non-motorized public access easement at Franklin Elementary as it is described in the attachment to the agenda? Moved by trustee Kendall and seconded by trustee Lorenzen. Is there any board discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, then all elementary trustees in favor of approving the attached perpetual non-motorized public access easement at Franklin Elementary, please indicate by raising your hand. And that's all elementary trustees present. Then we move on to number 4, which is Franklin and Lowell FF&E, which stands for Furniture, Fixtures, and Equipment. And it looks like this is information only, Burley, so it looks like we will be probably acting on it at a subsequent board meeting, but this is to introduce us to what's going to be happening.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring this up. I brought it up last board meeting really briefly in the Smart Schools 2020 update, but I wanted to bring it back up just so that you guys were aware and had more information on it. We're kind of in a time crunch to make sure we got the FF&E in to Missoula on time, so we kind of had to rush that RFP through. We were working with LPW to help us, along with Amy Shattuck and Brian Bissett, the principals at Lowell and Franklin. They worked quite a bit on creating these packages and looking at what their needs were for their schools. But we put this out for bid. Typically, we bring it to you to put out for bid first, but I just want to make sure that you guys were aware of what we were doing because of the time constraints. They do close on April 3rd, and we would bring those back to the board April 11th for final approval.
Any questions for Burley? Trustee Smith?
I was just wondering, is this a package, one bid for both? Are the bids for both schools so that the FF&E for both of them will be the same, or are they doing 2 bids at a time? Or?
Yeah, it's a package,
Package, yeah.
and we are doing that to hopefully get some reduction in costs.
That's what I was
And so Amy and Brian worked a lot of hours working it out, trying to figure out, what equipment or what FF&E be better for each school. So, and a lot of it's similar stuff, so we can get a lot more in bulk.
Good, thanks.
I just have 2 questions, if that's okay. Is this the process that we will use for other schools, or does this look different because of the time crunch?
This is be the process we'll use for other schools as well. Initially, we had, we were going to do it in-house, and we realized the time constraints it was going to put on the district. And so we reached out to LPW to help us facilitate that. That was originally put into their proposal, but we chose not to accept it at that time. So, and because we combined them, we actually got a reduction in cost from LPW because they were given to us individually at first. So we've realized that it's, something that the district doesn't want to take on, and that we like to have those services assist us, but having staff and principals involved, very much so. Every school will be different based on the size. Paxton was much different. We did use the design firm to help us with that as well, but it was on a much smaller scale, obviously. So it depends on the scale of the project,
Okay.
of how it'll operate.
And then my other question was just how the budget looks for this piece of the project. Are we feeling like there's adequate funds in the budget after we're getting through the construction pieces? Or,
Well, I think April 3rd will give us a better picture of what that looks like. Budgets, of course, are very tight, and they didn't have a lot of budget to work with, but when they went through and determined what their needs were, both Brian and Amy felt very happy with what they put on paper, and so we'll see how that comes back in the form of the bids.
Just a question about how much of the furniture from each of those schools is being replaced or upgraded? Like, are we fitting out the entire building brand new, or are we moving lots of things back from East Missoula or that kind of stuff?
There will be some things moved. So the first thing we did was we had Brian and Amy get with their staff and go through what they have currently and what's in good shape and working order and can be used, whether in flexible space or in a new classroom. So we wanted to make sure that we just didn't get rid of everything that was still in good working shape. I think for the most part, you're going to see all new desks and tables. Well, they're going more to the table thing to make it more compatible with moving things around and stuff. But I think you won't see any desks. You'll see more tables and chairs. But I don't think you're going to see a lot of brand new teachers' desks and that kind of stuff. So, but I think when we walk through the building when it's complete, you'll be pleasantly surprised how much you won't recognize that we kept. So. We wanted to make sure that we were being, of course, the budget's tight, but we want to make sure we're doing the right thing with the taxpayer dollars as well, and we're not getting rid of things that we don't need to get rid of.
Any other questions? I had one question. So just so everyone understands, the LPW that you're referring to is actually LaRue Page Warner, which is the architectural firm. So I guess my question is, are they often consulted as to, like, once they've built the building, do they want to have a say in how it should be furnished? Or is that something that is unique to this situation?
Well, I haven't designed a whole lot of brand new buildings. But I'm going to guess, just because of getting to know architects, I'm going to guess they'd love to have their hand in that because it's their finished product and it's their blank canvas. So I'm going to guess it's very common with work with Holtang. It sounds like it's fairly common in the schools they've worked in as well, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, but yeah, this is a pretty common practice.
Thanks. Any other questions for Burley? It's information only. Seeing none, is there any public comment? Well, thanks, Burley. Thanks for that update. And then we'll move on to number 5, which is to approve the audit report for period ending June 30th, 2016. And this is on elementary and secondary. And so there is a recommendation that we approve the audit report for fiscal year 2016. And it looks like we were going to, oh, there you are. I'm sorry, the podium's hiding everyone tonight. And so Stephanie Fries from Anderson Zermulin will be here to let us know what the results of the audit report are. And so Pat, I didn't know if you wanted to introduce Stephanie first?
Sorry. So Anderson Zermulin, as mentioned, performed our audit again this year, and the financial report is posted on our website. It's about a 100-page document. There's quite a bit of very good information if you've had a chance to review it. Anderson Zermulin does a thorough job, and we're happy again this year to have Stephanie Fries, one of the partners with AZ, with us to discuss the financial report and then the unmodified opinion, which we're happy about. And also, I'd like to thank Dan Parrish, who's here. He's our accounting supervisor and instrumental in the work with the auditors and in completing the audit report, the financial report. Thank you.
Thanks. And now we'll hear from Stephanie.
Thank you for having me today. Did you get the?
They're still going, and I have to apologize. I should have printed these sooner, so we had a little communication thing here, so we are printing them right now.
So that you'll have a hard copy. We didn't get the bound ones quite done to bring today, but we'll mail those up to you. But I'll go over them, and then once you get the copy, if you want to go back and revisit anything, happy to do so. So I passed out an agenda of what I want to go over, and the very first thing, I put this together about 10 o'clock last night, and I noticed that I didn't change June 30th of 15 to 16, but this is for this prior year financial statement audit. And like Pat said, my name is Stephanie Fries, and I'm the audit partner on this engagement. I think this is about my 5th or 6th year, and then prior to that, I did the quality control review on this audit. So I'm pretty familiar with the school district, and I very much enjoy working on this audit. You have a great staff and good people to work with, so it makes it a lot easier for us to complete all the work that we have to do to go through. So let's start with the financial statements. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on here. I've attached the trending analysis that we've done every year for this group. It's stapled to the agenda, and we'll go over that here shortly. But the most important thing is, like Pat said, on page 1 through 3 is our independent auditor's report, and you did receive an unmodified or clean opinion on your financial statements. So that basically means that as they're presented here, in our opinion, they're materially correct. And you can't get any better opinion than that from an auditor. We're pretty, but a couple other things that I wanted to talk about here is if there's anything that you do read in the financial statements once you get your hard copy or the uploaded PDF, is the MD&A, and that's on page 4 through, it's a pretty large one. I think about 4 through 15 or 14, and that is written by Dan and Pat. And there's some of the number tables we pull in for them, but it's a good overview of what's in the financial statement, how the year went, what some of the changes were from 2015 to 2016, and it's more in layman's terms, and so I think it's just a good introduction to the financial statements, and I always recommend that if of anything in here to read the MD&A. Also, I wanted to point out that this year we had no additional or new footnotes in here, so it's going to look very similar to the prior year's financial statement. If you remember, those that were here last year, you had to implement the pension standard last year, and that added about 20 pages of footnotes to the financial statement, but those have stayed the same. One change that has occurred because of it being the second year under the pension standard is there's 2 required schedules right after the footnotes in here. They were there last year, but now there's about 4 to 5 pages of notes to those schedules. It's a lot of duplication to what's in the footnotes, but it's required to be with those schedules. And basically what those notes are changes that occurred to the pension liability. So it's more actuarial related, like did the investment earnings meet the assumptions that they use to calculate that? Did legislature pass any rules that would change how that's calculated and those kinds of things? So that's new in here this year, because last year of implementation, there wouldn't have been any changes yet. So you'll see that every year going forward, and might be something that you might peruse to see what changed in that liability from one year to the next. The other part of the financial statement, once you get a hard copy, that I think is very interesting is the 10-year trend analysis, and that's on page 78 through 82. And this is not required to be in a financial statement, but management, Dan and Pat and their staff put this together, and then we include it as a supplementary schedule we don't give an opinion on this information, but really a lot of the numbers we have audited. But I think it's also very interesting information to see, how has your enrollment done over the last 10 years? And in fact, it's increased pretty significantly over the last few years. It was up 144 students this last fall. It also presents the assessed valuation and the taxable valuation per district over the 10 years. And, the highest major taxpayers in each district. So it's just, useful information. Bonding agents will use this information a lot of times when they're putting a bond package together, and I like to go through those for the various schools if they present them, which a lot of them don't. So that is additional work that staff has gone to just to be transparent and allow this to be good information for the readers. And then the single audit section, which is a required section anytime you have federal grants, federal expenditures over $750,000 now. That starts on page 85, and listed there is all of the grants that you have received and the expenditures on them. And this year you received and spent about $8.4 million of federal money. And any time that you receive a federal grant, you do certify that you will follow the requirements or laws governing that grant. And we do a risk analysis to determine which grants we will audit that compliance with, and then we give an opinion on that compliance. We're also required, which is the next auditor's report on page 89, is to do this audit not only in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, but also government auditing standards. And the differences there are we don't only audit the financial statement numbers, but we also look at your internal controls to determine if there's any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that the school district would have. We don't give an opinion on those, but we would be required to report any deficiencies to you. And then we also look at compliance with any laws or regulations or contracts that could have a material or direct effect on your financial statements if you didn't comply with it. And then again, we don't give an opinion on that compliance, but we do report any instances of non-compliance. And our auditor's report on page 89 states that we found no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in your internal control structure. You have good segregation of duties, good preventive and detective controls in place, so no findings to report there. And then we also had no instances of non-compliance with budget laws, payroll laws, and grant requirements there. And then on page 91, excuse my voice, is our auditor's report over the federal grants. And again, here, not only do we look at your internal controls, but we also have to test the controls that make sure that you're complying with those federal laws. So we even dig a little deeper into your internal controls in this area and would again report any deficiencies, and I'm happy to report that there were none. And then we do, like I said, a risk assessment to determine which programs we're going to give an opinion on the compliance. And this year, it was the National School Lunch Program and the Improving Teachers Quality State Grants. And we did end up with one compliance finding. I don't think this is anything new because OPI had come and done a test even before we came in. And basically it was your software, how it was allocating cash receipts, or it wasn't allocating it to the individual students, and therefore something could be reported to OPI. And also how the counts were being entered into the system that was uploaded to OPI. There was an issue there where we sampled 25 of the monthly reimbursements, or 3 months, and you underreported about 5,500 meals. So you shorted yourself some of the federal money that could have come through. Now, if you're going to if there's going to be compliance issues, it's always better to be on the conservative side, but I know that the school districts have already implemented changes to both of these systems, in that the point of sale system was changed immediately when that was found to be able to report the cash directly to an individual student. And also, there was going to be a review process so that the numbers could be uploaded into the OPI system and then somebody would double check them. These errors, this error here was human error. There was no, just a data entry issue, and that's where you want a review process so that you can catch any of those errors. And I'm sure the school district's already implemented that review process.
We have, we're doing that monthly. We've done it for the whole year now.
Okay.
And that's a part of, you all approved, or the school board anyways, approved position, a halftime bookkeeper position. And, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm Dan Parrish, accounting supervisor for the school district, and in response to the findings on, well, first on the point of sale system, I guess Stephanie covered that's taken care of. So there's no more just taking cash and ringing it up as a meal. It actually, they enter the student's number so that we know that it's a reimbursable meal in our account. And then the monthly counts that are being summarized and reported to OPI, we hired the school board approved a halftime bookkeeper position. It might have been last year around this time, and that position is partly funded with food service money, and that's providing the review needed, the time needed to do that review, as well as other pieces. But so as far as this finding goes, or these two items, it's taken care of. So, sorry, Stephanie.
Okay. No, that's good. Also, a thing to point out with that, when I said that you shorted yourself about 5,500 meals, that seems like a lot, but for those 3 months, it's only 1.7% of the entire population that was reported. So, again, it's a pretty minute error for the 3 months that we sampled. It's just when we test this compliance, we're required to report any findings on that. So, any questions on that? All right, and then attached to, well, I guess a couple other things to report, communications that were required to report to governance is whether there were any new accounting policies adopted, and there were none this year. We're also required to report that any significant transactions that the school district enters into, we do audit those, test those, and make sure that they had the appropriate supporting documentation and authorization, and we're happy to report that they all did. The financial statements do require estimates to be made by management. The most significant estimates are the valuation for the incurred but unpaid claims in the insurance fund, depreciation expense, the liability for the other post-employment benefits, and the pension liabilities. The largest dollar amounts are those last ones, and management basically hires actuaries to calculate that. Any significant estimate, we are required to test how management came up with that dollar amount, whether we test the assumptions or test the actuarial reports. We encountered no difficulties in dealing with management or performing the audit. Every year we send out a list of items and a timeline that we have management, Dan and Pat and their staff agree to, and we had everything received on time, and the audit was very efficient because of that. And we did receive a management representation letter that is dated March 24th, and that is basically management telling us that they didn't withhold any information, that they gave us everything we asked for. It's like a 3 or 4 page letter, but, so there's a lot more into it, but it's basically just representations to us that they've provided us all the information. And then at the bottom of that schedule is just the new accounting standards and that have been finalized and when they're effective. So none of these will really have a huge effect on the school district at this time. And then the attached page, this year I left off Helena and Kalispell because they're so late getting their financial statements out. And in the past, I've reported sometimes 2 years prior or 1 year prior, and this year I just left it off. So the 3 schools I'm comparing to are the Bozeman School District, Billings School District, and Great Falls, because they have uploaded their, well, we do the audit for Bozeman and Great Falls, and then Billings had uploaded their CAFR to their website. So I think this is pretty interesting information. Basically, it's 5 years of information for Missoula School District, with then the column in between is the percentages of these various things, and then compared to the percentages of those other schools. The first section is your net assets. And as you can see, your investment in capital assets, which is your fixed assets less any debt that's related to those purchases or fixed assets, plus any cash on hand. So because of your new bond issuance and you hadn't spent all that yet, that does get added in, or offsets some of that debt, basically. And you have that percentage for Missoula School District is about 134%. Your restricted net assets, which are restricted for debt service, some capital projects, and then programs, is about 37%. That's held pretty consistent from 1 year to the next, as you can see if you look across the 5 years. And then the unrestricted net assets is a deficit of about 61 million, and that is because of that pension liability on there. And as you can see, it was implemented in 15, and that's when that hit. But it did improve almost $3 million this year. If you look, Billings School District, their deficit is about almost 300% of the total net assets. They have a huge pension liability. Bozeman and Great Falls are, fairly similar. Fund balance then is, the net assets is the government-wide, so that includes full accrual, your fixed assets, your debt. The fund balance net position there is on your individual funds within the districts, and how that is allocated between the different types. So we have unassigned, which really is can be your flexible. You'd like to see that be. I mean, you guys have a good one at about 4%. Bozeman's is about 11%. And it really depends too, I should clarify here that this is determined by a resolution of the board how these, whether you're going to commit funds or assign funds. So each school can be a little different on their, their management's or the board's decision to either commit the funds for something specific. Once it's committed, it has to be spent that way unless the board does another resolution to change that commitment. So it can't be changed by management, it has to be changed by the board. You guys have about 41% assigned to a specific function. And your restricted net assets at the fund balance level is about 55%, and that was basically the bond, what was left in fund balance on the bonds. That isn't included in restricted on the government-wide because it is included in the investment and capital asset at the government-wide level. So that's why there's a difference between the two restricted categories. General fund balance was about $4 million. Revenues, about 41% of your funding is from the state. About 29% is from property taxes, which if you look, Bozeman School District, they have about 40% of their revenue funding is from property taxes. Great Falls School District, if you look, they get about 51% from the state. So their state allocations are considerably more than the other school districts. And that would have to do with, their state entitlement for special education and that kind of thing. Expenses, instruction, you spend about 57% of your funding on instruction, which is very significant. And one thing that changed a little bit this year, you guys have had very little in interest or fiscal charges. That did go up, but it's still only 1% of your resources. And administration and supporting services, really administration, you're very concerned in that you only spend about 8% on running the underlying program of the school district. So that's the lowest of all the AA schools. Fall enrollment went up about 144 students, and therefore just a quick and dirty calculation, cost per student, just taking the total expenses divided by the number of students, you spend about $11,287 per student. And then looking at cash reserves, and the number here has basically is your total cash left, less what's left in the bond, the building fund. And so you're at 28% of cash reserves, which is a good reserve to have on hand. And it's pretty similar to the other school districts. That's a pretty recommended range there, so. Any questions?
Any questions for Stephanie? Trustee Briggsett?
So sorry if you went over this and I just missed it, but the interest and fiscal charges, what was the reason for that big increase?
Well, it was somewhat of the new bond issuance, and bond issue costs are expensed as an interest charge in accordance with GAAP. So there was some bond costs associated with selling those bonds, and that was a good part of that. Is that?
Quick question and a comment. First, I just want to thank Pat and Dan and your team. It's great to get another great audit. I've seen a lot of these, and a lot of them are really good. You guys do a great job. It's a lot of hard work, and thank you, Stephanie, for bringing this to our attention and doing this. Quick question is, you mentioned when we get the hard copy to read the MD&A at the beginning. What does MD&A stand for?
Management's discussion and analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about these GAAP terms that we're used to. GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles.
Any other questions for Stephanie? Okay, so,
Madam Chair,
sure, just Superintendent Thane.
say how much I appreciate Stephanie Ruthie from Anderson to Newland, but also recognize Pat, Dan, and all those in business services who day in and day out manage all the accounts and the funds and really provide the incredible support services that allow us not only to function as a district, but to be good stewards of the public funds and the public trust. And to have a clean audit year after year is really a testament to the fine work that all of them do. And I know they take their responsibilities very seriously, and they work diligently to make sure that we stay in compliance and that we meet the expectations, not only of the auditors, but of the public. And I, as superintendent, just simply cannot express enough how much I value the work they do and how important it is for us as a school district to have the kind of management that we get year in and year out, day in and day out from our business service office. So thank you to them. I would also just highlight one other point from Stephanie's analysis. And again, she included some longitudinal data, not only on our revenue and expenses, but on our enrollment. And as we look at our Smart Schools 2020 plan, one of the important elements was that we wanted to increase capacity in all of our K-5 buildings to serve 450 to 500 students. And one of the things that she related in the report is between 2010 and 2016, our enrollment has increased 433 students. And so again, that simply validates the work that was done in advance of the bond issue with regard to our demographic projections and our need for capacity in elementary schools. So again, as we approach the bond issue and completion of the bond project, we're right on target to manage the enrollments that we have projected up through 2022. So again, all the pieces seem to be coming together, and I just so appreciate the work that's been done to make sure that that happens in an organized and systematic fashion for the district. So thank you to all that have been involved.
Thanks. Any other questions for Stephanie? Go ahead. Did you have a question for Stephanie? Okay, sure.
So I just wanted to say that over the years, I've gotten a ton of recognition for the audit and whatnot. And I just have to say, throughout the year, Pat and I get a ton of questions from folks in the business building and even, out in the buildings that question things and are uncomfortable with things. And I tell them anymore, you guys are the reason that we get the good audit reports, because you're questioning things and not just doing things without thinking about it. So I just want to thank all those folks who probably will never hear this.
Thanks. And so I'll throw out two options for a motion, just in the interest of the fact that spring break was last week, and this just was posted last week. And I don't know how many people in the public or even on the board had a chance to read it through with great detail, and just in terms of, I'll entertain a motion to approve it or a motion to table it and bring it back, just to let everyone be able to actually see the longer document that isn't attached to our written agenda and went up on the website on Friday, right at the tail end of spring break. So, if people are comfortable moving forward today, that's fine. If people want just to give 2 weeks more notice to let everyone take a look at it before we entertain a motion. So I'll entertain any kind of motion concerning the audit at this time.
I don't know how to state this motion, but I'd like to wait 2 weeks.
So just motion to table the administrative request.
Okay, that's my motion. Thank you.
Is there a second? Whoops, sorry, seconded by trustee Lorenzen. Any board discussion? I mean, just because of when spring break fell this year, I would think it would be a good opportunity for all of us to get a chance to read it in a little bit less rushed fashion, and to let the public actually be able to read it at a time when a lot of them were away for spring break in terms of our constituency. So I think just bringing it back in 2 weeks, it doesn't mean that Stephanie needs to come back because she's given such a thorough presentation today, but just in case there would be any other questions that the board might have of Pat or Dan, or of public comment that we might get, I think that would be a safer way to proceed. Is that okay with everyone? So we have a second in motion. Is there any other discussion by the board? Any public comment?
Trustee Holland, if I may, I would just like to ask Pat if there's any time sensitivity
that's a good
to
question.
making sure that we have this approved by the board.
There is a little bit of a time sensitivity for filing the audit report and then posting on USAC, or the, what's the? EMA, the clearinghouse that we report our financial documents on. We can post the draft report and financial statements on EMA, and this is sort of the clearinghouse where rating agencies have the opportunity to review that, and that follows with the SEC guidelines that we talked about a couple of years ago. So it can be done, but maybe Stephanie or Dan want to talk a little more about the timeline.
And I guess that's my question, is March 30th an important date for us?
There is a deadline. Anytime you receive the federal awards, you have to post that. Your deadline is March 31st. I would recommend that we post that anyway, and then if something needed to be changed, we can pull it down. And the reason is, if you don't post it by the deadline, then you become a high-risk entity, and the amount of federal awards that have to be audited increase. And it's easy to, if something were to happen and you do want a change or something, to pull it down and repost the reissued financial statement, but I would recommend meeting that deadline.
So that, just to make sure I understand, that means we should act on it tonight so that the official audit is approved tonight? I mean, in terms of the, I'm not understanding whether you
Yeah,
can post a
I guess-
document without board approval and then get board approval afterwards, or the only document you can
Yeah, because I
post-
can't post a draft to
Okay,
that
that's- that's all I
website,
was trying to
so,
clarify.
and I guess, yeah, I guess if you feel at all comfortable, I would recommend you approve it tonight.
Okay.
And I guess you could say, reissuance, you could revisit it in 2 weeks. I'm not sure how you do that.
Well, and I guess my question, Madam Chair, would be this. If in fact trustees have additional questions next week, it's not going to change the audit report. So I would suggest that if the board is comfortable approving the audit, completing the posting so that we meet these timelines, then if there are additional questions that are related to the audit, that's likely an information only, and we could have discussion about those specific audit items. But it's nothing that we would decide that would compel Stephanie and her team to go back and change the audit. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and once I think about it, then that's probably the better way to do it. And so I'll let trustee Kendall decide whether she wants to withdraw.
I'd like to withdraw my motion,
Okay.
and I'd like to offer a different motion.
Okay, and we just need to make sure whoever seconded trustee Lorenzen's okay, since it was a seconded motion. Yeah. Okay, so now,
So
motion.
here is my actual real motion, based on the recommendation of staff and the auditor, that we approve this audit tonight.
Seconded by trustee Lorenzen. And now just to clarify for anyone who's watching at home, Superintendent Thane brought up a great point. We are audited each year and receive a report, and the board or individual trustees can't change what the report says. We actually got a really good audit report this year, and it is supported by a lot of documents explaining why the audit report came out the way it did. And the concern I had is just that it takes a lot of time to read through that, and it didn't get posted to the website until during spring break. But Superintendent Thane is correct. We can't force Anderson Zermulin to change their audit, and nor should we be able to have that authority. So if we approve the audit tonight, then it's appropriate that it's approved in a timely fashion to meet federal guidelines. But if anyone has questions, we can always come back and ask Stephanie to come back, or Dan and Pat to be present to further walk us through any questions. So as everyone knows, when we're setting the agenda, if anyone, upon reflection and review of the materials, wants to have a further discussion, either in 2 weeks or even in a month when we'll be back in Missoula, just let either Superintendent Thane or me know, and we'll have that further discussion. So, Trustee Smith?
Are we in the discussion phase here? I guess I just want to make sure, or suggest maybe that, as opposed to if we want to talk about it and having it come up on the agenda, can we actually have it on the agenda? That way, if someone in the public does read about it, it will be an agenda listed item, even if it's just us kind of saying, are we all good with what we said, and fine, and then if there's any public comment, we could discuss it. Is that even necessary?
Anytime we're going to get a piece of, anytime anything's going to be presented to the board, it has to be in the agenda. There's no way for it
Right, but I guess my
not to be
question
in the
is,
agenda.
I know, but my question is, you said that, I want to make sure I understood you right. we're going to approve this, and then we can still go back and read it, and if I read it and I want a question, or if I want to bring it up, I should go to you and ask you to put it on the agenda. I'm being preemptive in my request.
not understanding it, so.
Why don't we just plan on putting it on the next agenda so that if anybody wants to discuss it, and the public, not just me, that it will be on the agenda so we can discuss it.
I'll suggest we move it for a month, because we'll
That's
be
fine.
back in Missoula. And I don't know.
Oh, that's a
if
good
we're
idea.
Providing an opportunity for everyone to talk about it, our bigger population is in Missoula rather than Sealy.
Yeah, I don't care when, I just.
Okay, so
would
we'll
like
just
to
add it
plan
on as information only, and Pat, if Pat and Dan, or even just Pat doesn't mind recapping it in a more abbreviated version. Okay,
Thank you.
trustee,
And for this clarification,
Hey, we-
Madam Chair.
Sure.
The April 11th board meeting is scheduled for Missoula. It's the April 25th board meeting that will be in
okay.
Sealy.
Thanks, I'm backwards on that. So, okay, so we're good. 2 weeks is fine. Okay, so I'm out of sync with spring break being early this year, so I'm mixed up. Okay, so is any other board discussion or any further clarification, since I've thrown out a bit of a mix-up on all that, just because I wasn't understanding the fact that we can't really change the audit, and there's very valid reasons to act on it tonight. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, then all trustees in favor of approving the audit report, as has been summarized by Stephanie and as has been posted to the district website, please indicate by raising your hand. That's all trustees present. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for that point, Superintendent Thane, I appreciate it. And then we move on to a whole series of somewhat related topics that have to do with the upcoming elections. So I guess we'll just take them through sequentially, Pat, and they're going to be parallel ones for both elementary and high school side. And thank you, Stephanie, so much for taking the time out tonight. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, you bet. So beginning on page 41, the first subtopic under the election is the certification of the ballot language for the elementary school trustee election. And this is, as mentioned in the elementary, there are 2 open school trustee positions. There are 2 filings that were submitted in time to the elections office or through our office, and those folks are listed there on page 41. There is an opportunity for write-in candidates to file by the 30th, and so it would be premature to cancel and declare the election by acclamation at this point in time, just because there's another deadline that follows here on Thursday. But assuming there are no filings on write-in candidates, then the election can be canceled and the positions appointed by acclamation. And that's, I'm actually jumping ahead a little bit, but that's the next agenda item that we have on the agenda, and it's referenced on page 42. But first of all, the certification of the ballot. This is how the ballot would appear if there were a write-in candidate between now and Thursday.
Questions for Pat before I entertain a motion? Trustee Briggsett?
So did you say that we are declaring the election by acclamation tonight, even though there are deadlines? Is that?
We're not, and I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit, but the next item is a resolution authorizing the board chair and the superintendent to declare the election by acclamation in the event there's no write-in candidate on the 30th. So it's really a resolution of authorization and not a resolution performing that act. It's authorizing it to happen.
So if something were to happen between tonight and the 30th, could we come to you and ask for a change, or would it?
Well, this ballot will be the ballot. Even if there's a write-in candidate, they don't get to appear on the ballot. So the ballot will, the certification can happen tonight without worry of some following event.
But the election would still happen. then.
Exactly, yep.
Any other questions for Pat? So just so I understand it, the difference between 6A and 6B. 6A is we're saying that there's a certain timeline by which candidates have to submit their names. The candidates who have met that timeline are the two that are listed on the ballot on page 41. And so 6A is approving the ballot language at this time because those are the candidates that meet the qualifications and have, and so that's all we're doing in A. And we'll be
Exactly.
talking about B, which is a secondary process in a minute.
Exactly.
Okay. Any other questions? So this is elementary only. Is there a motion to approve the attached ballot language for the elementary trustee election with the district clerk finalizing the candidate names on March 31st, which is the day after the write-in candidate? Moved by trustee Smith. Is there a second? Seconded by trustee Decker. All those elementary trustees in favor of approving the attached ballot language for the elementary trustee election, please indicate by raising your hand. And that's all elementary trustees present. And now we move on, oh, sorry. Let's back up before we take the vote. Any public comment on this? Okay, seeing none, then if we can just re-vote for elementary trustees, all those in favor of approving the attached ballot language, please indicate by raising your hand again. I apologize. Thank you so much. Now we move on to B, and as I think you were beginning to say, Pat, this is a resolution that allows, basically, it's a contingency resolution where if certain things don't happen, in other words, there aren't a write-in candidate, then there's a mechanism by which the election can be held by acclamation.
That's exactly right. So ultimately, if the number of candidates, including write-in candidates, is equal to the number of open positions, then the authorization is granted via the resolution by board here tonight for the superintendent or his designee and the board chair to cancel that part of the election and declare the candidates elected by acclamation.
Any questions for Pat? Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2017-8E, which authorizes the cancellation of the election and declaration of election if the number of candidates and write-in candidates is less or equal to the number of open positions? Is there a motion? Moved by trustee Lorenzen, is there a second? Seconded by trustee Smith. Is there any board discussion? Trustee Decker?
So, looking down yet further on the agenda, it looks like we'll be mailing out ballots anyway.
Yes. So it's only this portion of the election that would be canceled.
Right.
Or that's the authorization by the resolution is to only cancel this portion of the election.
So this doesn't actually save us any money to not have to do,
That's correct,
okay,
yes.
just checking.
Yep.
In prior years, it actually has, but this year, it probably won't. So, okay. Any other questions or comments? Trustee Smith?
I guess just to address trustee Decker's question, it wouldn't save us money on the people counting the ballots? I mean, do they get paid hourly?
Well, that's a good point. I shouldn't say that it won't save anything. It's possible.
Okay, so it's marginal, but,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to make sure.
And we'll discuss why it's not going to save us a lot of money shortly, but that's not the item on the agenda right at this point, so. So we have a seconded motion, Elizabeth? Yes. Okay. Any other board discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, all elementary trustees in favor of approving Resolution 2017-8E, which authorizes the cancellation of the election and declaration of the election. If the number of candidates and write-in candidates is less or equal to the number of open positions, please indicate by raising your hand. And that's all elementary trustees present. And then we move on to 6 C, and Pat, if you can explain what this is, and this is the reason why we were jumping a little bit ahead, why there is likely to be an mail-out ballot. Anyway,
You bet. So this portion of the elementary election involves a operating levy in the general fund and a certified ballot. So what we're asking the board to do is to certify this ballot, and at the beginning of the meeting, when the agenda was approved, Chair Holland corrected the amount that's listed there on page 43 from 805,000 to 804,861. This is the administration's recommendation for the amount of the levy. This amount represents the maximum amount of a levy that the board could ask for. This would bring the budget in the general fund for the elementary to max budget next year. So that's the reason for this amount. It's also based upon what's currently available from the legislature, and that would both include Senate Bill 191 as well as the funding bill that's out there. The levy amount wouldn't actually change if the data for achievement piece to the funding formula was removed. So just to make that point clear, but this is calculated based upon the best information we have right now.
If I may add, Madam Chair, we have in the last 5 years run only one operating levy for the general fund in the elementary district. This is somewhat of an interesting situation because we are engaged in the legislative year. There are still a few moving pieces, but as Pat said, the best information we have available at this time would indicate that the levy amount would likely not change based on any further legislative action. One of the critical pieces of legislation that has passed and has actually been signed is the statutory inflation increases that are accorded to school districts. And under normal circumstances, the statute would call for an inflationary increase that's based on a 3-year average of the consumer price index, which would have, in this case, been 1.37%. However, the legislature, due to declining revenues, altered that amount and has only built in 0.5% for the inflationary increase that we would anticipate to receive for fiscal year 2018. So it puts us in a position where we will need to ask the local taxpayers for support of a general fund mill levy in order to maintain our budget authority and to operate at the maximum general fund budget amount. This actually comes prior to a budget update that Pat will give a little bit later on, but you'll see that even with the inclusion and the successful passage of this bill levy request in the elementary district, we still have some work to do with the general fund budget in order to balance. That's very true in the elementary district, but even more critical in the secondary district. So again, I just want the public as well as the trustees to understand that again, we work to be very good stewards of the public funds, but it's necessary in order to meet the obligations for the district, given our increased enrollment, some necessary increase in staffing, plus the increases that we have offered to staff through our collective bargaining agreement. So this is really a critical piece of that budget, and certainly encourage the board's support.
thanks. Any other questions for Pat or Superintendent Thane? Sure. Trustee Lorenzen?
So in the past, and I don't see that here, in the past, we've had a situation where we have transferred money through interlocal agreement from the elementary to the high school. Are we going to do that this year, or can we be sure we're not going to do that this year?
I would anticipate that we would look to do that again this year. And the reason is that the high school budget hasn't quite climbed out of its flat enrollment that it's really been experiencing now for up to about 10 years. And what we're asking the board, what we will ask the board to do is to support the the levy and the tuition fund as well for the excess special ed costs, which between that piece and then the voted levy here, I would anticipate another interlocal support from the elementary to the high school.
The budgets, the elementary and the secondary budgets, we will look toward any potential at year end not to fully affect any interlocal agreements that might have been included in the budgeting process. So for example, if in the secondary district we have a good year in utilities or we don't utilize the full budgeted amount in substitute teachers, then we don't exercise the full amount of the interlocal agreement. The challenge we face is that when we bargain with all employee groups, we don't bargain as two separate districts, and we don't consider the capacity of each district's budget, but generally have utilized, and it's worked actually both directions in the past, sometimes secondary to elementary and sometimes elementary to secondary. We've utilized the interlocal agreements to balance that out to make sure that we can afford all district employees the same raises that are called for in their collective bargaining agreement. So we will work to minimize any interlocal agreement depending on year-end status, but in order to balance the budgets as we plan for the year, we would likely include an interlocal agreement to make the budgets work.
Any other questions? Trustee Smith?
Superintendent Thane already addressed, I think, what I was going to ask, and I just want to make sure that this is clear to me and to the people listening. So Pat or Mark, whichever, the 1.37% that is what we were basically due to get because of inflationary changes. So thanks to legislation, the bill that's in front of them now, and you said it passed already? Or, okay, so that piece has, so, but that has been chopped down to 0.5%. So that 0.87% that we're not getting, part of this levy, or if not most of it, or all of it, is to make up for some of that? Is that what I understand?
It removes from you some options, I would say, some flexibility, because that would represent a much greater increase in the
Funding,
funding.
the state
That's right.
funding, okay.
That's right.
And for the record, we don't, I know that they'll give us, or the second year of that bill, it gives us the remainder of the, what was the total, 2% or?
Next year of the biennium, it's 1.87.
Which is more than it would have been.
In total, it's exactly the same, 2.37.
Almost.
Yeah, you lose the
interest on
value,
the interest,
yeah.
right, okay. But, all right, I just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
One of the effects, however, is that since we're afforded a lower amount in the first year of the biennium, we lose the compounding effect when the 1.37% is applied in the second, or the 1.87% is applied in the second year. So normally, had we gotten the 1.37% this year and then gotten the 1% in the second year, the compounding effect of that 1% in addition to this year's 1.37% would have been greater than the net effect will be in having a lesser amount the first year than the second year. So that also accounts for some savings that the legislature is banking upon.
Any other questions? I just have one question. It sounds like the legislature's underfunding special education needs now. Is this is this involving that at all, in that we still have our obligation to our students to provide appropriate services?
I would say that it is, in the sense that the portion of the school funding formula that the component that's tied to special education, and it's a combination of two block grants, instructional block grant, related services block grant, and then the disproportionate cost reimbursement. All three of those components are A and B inflationarily, or A and B related. In other words, they're funded tied to A and B, but they're also an amount that could be adjusted for inflation. And so it's the only part of the school funding formula really that's not adjusted for inflation. So it does have an impact in the sense that inflation would have boosted the available budget.
House Bill 390 is still active, and it has a very broad title, and its title is something to the effect of generally revised school funding laws. So there is some belief that House Bill 390 in the 11th hour could be a vehicle by which education funding is adjusted. As you may have noticed, the legislative fiscal analyst has actually revised the revenue projections based on the experience of the last 3 months. So although it's probably a stretch, there is still some hope that special education might be addressed under House Bill 390. So again, that would not likely affect the levy amounts, but as Pat continues to work with the budget projections, that picture will become more clear in the next couple weeks.
Thanks. Any other questions or comment? Or do we have a motion yet? We don't, do we? Okay. Trustee Decker?
This, just a question about the language on the ballot. Should it, I mean, you may have said this when you shared the changes before. Should it say passage of this proposal will result in an increase? Is that an increase or is that the total? It doesn't say increase in that sentence.
I'm sorry, Trustee Decker, where are you looking at?
I'm sorry, on the ballot itself, page 43,
Uh-huh.
the second paragraph, passage of this proposal will result in an annual tax of approximately $992 on a home with an assessed property value of $100,000 and by 1984 on a home with an assessed property value of $200,000. So are we talking about will result in an increase of approximately?
Well, and then the previous paragraph, the last sentence, this levy will be an increase to the existing voter-approved levy. So what we're assessing is the tax on the increase. So the amount that's identified, the $804,861, this is the tax on that amount only. And that amount represents an increase to the
Okay.
existing voter-approved levy.
So the word by maybe in that paragraph, in the second part there, will result in an annual tax of approximately $992 on a home with an assessed property value of $100,000 and get rid of the by 1984 on a home with a, that by is just confusing.
I see
Okay.
what Trustee Decker's saying. I mean, the first sentence suggests that it will result in a tax of $992. The second one suggests that something is increasing because of use of the word by 1984.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. I see what you're saying.
So should we cross out the by?
I'm good with that.
Okay. Does anyone object to, before I entertain a motion, that we modify it to be grammatically correct or readable and as to its intention? Great, thank you for catching that. Okay, so with that change, are there any more questions? So is there a motion by an elementary trustee, let me get the language right, to approve the ballot language that's found on page 43 as we just amended for the elementary general fund levy election? Moved by trustee Kendall, is it seconded by trustee Newbold? Any board discussion? Trustee Lorenzen?
Okay, I'm not in favor of us running this levy this year. I know we discussed it in theory before, but I think that was before we saw what we're going to see later in this agenda, which is a $961,000 increase in the non-voted levies. So now if we add those two together, I believe we're at like a $1.7 million increase. I am concerned with the interlocal. I think it's misleading to run a levy on the elementary district knowing we're going to pass that money over to the high school district. I think if the money's going to the high school district, we just have to run it as a high school levy and drop the amount of the elementary levy, and that's my opinion. I'm also concerned that the people paying the elementary levy live in Missoula. They're paying for the schools, they're paying for both the high schools and the elementaries, they're paying for all the different tax increases going on in Missoula. So we list here, it's an increase of like $20 on a $200,000 home. And that passes right through to people's pocketbooks. If you go to this next resolution, we're going to see there's another $24 increase. Now we're looking at like $44 or $54, so. And it's just piling on with the cost. I think the district needs to accept, you know, the austerity measures that everyone is facing, you know, statewide. Also, it came up a few meetings ago that we're discussing selling land, and I think the public must be going, how much money do these people need? That we would run a levy, run a bond issue, and sell land all at once. I mean, that's just a lot of money to ask for.
Any other board discussion? Trustee Smith?
I'm sympathetic to trustee Lorenzen's position, although I would hesitate to point out that the interlocal agreements do go both ways, and as Mark Thane pointed out, Superintendent Thane pointed out, we have responsibilities to the entire unions that we have approved as a board, and, you know, the responsibilities that we have, financial responsibilities. Also, I'm pretty fairly certain, and Pat can answer this if it's a question, that the amounts that we're asking for are actually related. So, I mean, we've gotten an audit here that says our excellent financial records that we have, but I'm sympathetic to the way that it is presented. If you say we need more money, we need more money, we need more money, but the legislation, it's clear to me, the legislators have taken away money. Mark pointed out that I think the way that he actually said is that the compound interest is the way that the legislators are saving money. They're not saving money, they're neglecting their responsibilities to pass the funding on to the people of the local, at the local level. So now we are ending up picking up the bag for and they're going to take credit for saving money. So I will be in favor of this levy.
Any other board discussion? Trustee Bragstad?
Well, and also, didn't we discuss the fact that you said it would raise the taxes like $50 or something? We're raising it to 1984, not raising it more, like 1984 more, correct?
No, that's the increase.
So it's increasing 1984.
Over and above the, whatever discount.
Okay.
That's correct. That's the increase. And what's,
That's an annual.
For the year, okay.
Sorry.
I also want to just say that I appreciate what trustee Lorenzen is saying, but I agree completely with trustee Smith on this. And I think we have to do what we have to do to make it work. And I think education is one of the last places we would want to support austerity measures as the school board here.
Any other board discussion or comments? Seeing none, is there any public comment?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Just one clarification again, and it was referenced in the audit report. If we had a static enrollment, you might anticipate that our budget would not reflect the kinds of increases that Trustee Lorenzen discussed. And I fully sympathize with her view regarding the taxpayers. We're all taxpayers, and we certainly appreciate the need to be good stewards of the public funds. But as referenced in the audit report, we did have a 144 student increase on the elementary level this past year. And again, if a rough approximation of $10,000 a student, and I recognize that's beyond general funds, but that's about a $1.4 million cost increase that's referenced here. Again, special education costs have been an ongoing concern for us, and we need to do what we can to support the students and their IEPs, and that's one of the significant reasons that later on you'll be addressing some questions about the permissive levy and the tuition fund. But certainly the district works to be good stewards of the funds, but acknowledging that we do have, fortunately, increasing enrollment, and that enrollment increase has been 433 students over the last 5 years. That's significant, and we do need to still meet accreditation standards as well as fund programs in order to provide the level of education that we in Missoula have been accustomed to experience.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, then this is an elementary only. Trustee vote. So all elementary trustees, let me get back to my language, who approve the attached ballot language for the elementary general fund levy election as is found on page 43 with the change that we made, please indicate by raising your hand. And that's trustee Smith, trustee Beers, trustee Decker, trustee Kendall, trustee Newbold. All those opposed? And that's trustee Lorenzen. And so the motion passes. Then we move on to basically the same discussions on the items that would be found on the ballots that go out to the the high school trustees. And so 7A is to certify the ballot language for the high school trustee election for District D, and that's the only high school district that has a trustee up for election this year, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and if you just wanted, is there anything of significance other than there's one position open, there's one candidate open or applied?
That's what's significant, yeah. Thanks.
Significant, it just indicates that, there's one position open, just like there's two positions open at the elementary level, and we have two applicants. So we have one position open and one applicant. So does anyone have any questions for Pat on the high school side of things? And District D is Potomac, Sealy, and where? Clinton. And Clinton? Okay, so it's those areas. Okay, so no questions for Pat? Is there a motion from any trustee to approve the attached ballot language for the high school trustee election for District D, with the district clerk finalizing the candidate's name on March 31st under the same expectation if there's a write-in candidate? So it's moved by trustee Wake and seconded by trustee Kendall. Any board discussion? Seeing none. Any public comment? Seeing none, then all trustees in favor of approving the attached ballot language for the high school trustee election for District D, please indicate by raising your hand. And that is all trustees present. Thank you so much. And then we move on to B, which is Resolution 2017-7S, which is again the parallel to what we've just discussed, which authorizes cancellation of election and declaration of election by acclamation for District D. And so this is the same process which would permit the superintendent and the chair of the board, if no write-in candidates have filed by the filing date of March 30th, to declare that the election can be canceled and declare the election by acclamation. Is there any questions for Pat? Is there a motion to approve Resolution 2017-7S, which authorizes the cancellation of the election and declaration of the election if the number of candidates and write-in candidates is less or equal to the number of open positions? Moved by trustee Wake and seconded by trustee Kendall. Is there any board discussion? Is there any public comment? Seeing none, all trustees in favor of approving Resolution 2017-7S, please indicate by raise your hand. And a question?
Is this a typo where on the first line it says 17-5S? Okay, never mind. Yes. Okay, we're voting.
17 dash,
Mike said it.
I'm not, is there?
No, I know what Diane's saying because the resolution is described, I'm sorry to interrupt. May I?
Sure.
So the resolution references at the heading is 2017-7S, and then the body has 2017-5S. And so that number should be consistent, and yes. No, you're right, I'm sorry, the election was called, so we're describing 2017-5S as when the election was called, which is the previous election. This resolution is the one to authorize election by acclamation. My apology. So 15 that's right, yes.
So walk me through, is it 5 or is it 7, or is it both 5 and 7?
This resolution is 7, and then the resolution that's referenced in the first paragraph is the original resolution by the board
got it,
calling for the
got it.
election. Yeah.
Got it, okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's a little confusing. So does everyone understand that? Okay. So with that clarification, we have a seconded motion. Is there any more board discussion? And no more public comment? So all those in favor of approving Resolution 2017-7S, please indicate by raising your hand. And that's unanimous as to trustees present. And then we move on to C, which is to certify ballot language for high school general fund levy or cancellation of a high school general levy fund. And the recommendation is that we approve Resolution 2017-9S, authorizing the cancellation of the high school general fund levy election. And so, Pat, if you can walk us through this one, because it's a little different than what we just discussed.
Exactly. So the original resolution adopted by the board was to authorize a general fund levy election in the high school. And so this is the time to either certify that ballot calling for the election or canceling that election. The recommendation of administration is to cancel the general fund operating levy election. And it's not because the resources aren't necessary in the high school. It's because the amount of the levy election at 77,000 is such that we're anticipating utilizing other means to make up that difference, at least for 1 year. And that would involve more budget discussions and those types of discussions that we would have in different ways of looking at filling this $77,000 void would be to, for 1 year, move some expenditures in the high school to the building reserve and to the tech fund, to both those fund. Obviously, that will involve some greater discussion, but it's that type of concept and idea that we would propose to the board as a 1 year solution. What we anticipate is that next year we'll see a large freshman enrollment in the high school, and we will see a larger budgetary increase in the high school, and we'll see the potential to run a more meaningful levy in next year, and this could be the year from an enrollment standpoint where we see the upward trend in the high school rather than more of a significant upward trend. And what we've done the last 5 years in the high school is we haven't run a levy, and actually the last 4 years, including this year, the last levy we ran was in 2012 or 2013. And the same in the elementary, we ran one levy over the past 5 years. So we're trying to look at when that levy has the greatest impact and to run back-to-back levies, including a $77,000 levy. That's the rationale for us looking at different ways than running this levy.
If I may, I would also the cost of running an election in the high school district. The previous action the board took, barring any write-in candidates filing by March 30th, would allow us to fill the trustee seat by acclamation, thereby negating the need for a trustee election. If we were to run an election in the high school district solely for the purpose of generating a general fund levy of $77,000, the cost of running that election would essentially take a significant portion of the money we would generate from a successful passage of the levy. So, it's almost a zero-sum game when you start looking at the cost of the election versus the relatively small amount that it would generate.
Any other questions for Superintendent Thane or Pat? I have a question just in terms of the number of documents that we've been presented as attachments to the agenda. The reference on C is to page 46, where we made some changes, but following 46 are page 47, which is a resolution authorizing the cancellation of the general fund election, and then on 48 is the notice of election cancellation. So which one of these three documents are we addressing under this agenda item C?
So on page 47, the resolution authorizing cancellation, that document itself references a notice of cancellation. So they go hand in hand. So the page 47, the last paragraph, it directs the chairperson and the clerk to cancel the general fund levy election by means of filing the notice of cancellation with the county election administrator in the form attached here too. So 47 and 48, those two documents go together. The notice is embedded within the resolution itself.
Okay, and so the item found on page 46 is something that we're actually not going to be taking action on under 7C.
That's correct, and the ballot I left in the packet in the event the trustees proceeded with the levy election and would then need to certify the ballot in order for it to appear on the ballot. So that's why it's also attached, is to leave that option open to the board.
Trustee Decker?
If the levy did go out, would it go in the same mailing to the people that were sending the elementary one, or is that it obviously wouldn't go to, it would go to more people because it would go to the whole high school district, but would it be on the same, or is it a separate envelope, separate stamp, separate mailing?
I believe it's in the same envelope, and so and what they would have to do at the elections office is only District D would get the trustee election, and then the levy election, if both happened in the elementary and the high school, you would have the overlap of taxpayers that are both in the elementary and the high school district that would have both. So the elementary district would see both, and then the district that exists outside the elementary district would receive the one, just the high school.
Can I ask, is that correct? I mean, the individuals who would be voting on, if there was an election for a trustee, it would only be District D.
I was just talking about if there was a levy. I'm sorry, I might have misunderstood the question. I thought Trustee Decker was talking if there was a levy.
Yes, at this point, we don't know for sure if we're needing to mail out ballots because we have to wait for the write-in in both districts. So it's possible there will be no mailing for the person election. But if we decided to move ahead with this levy, there would be a mailing for an elementary levy and there would be a mailing for a high school levy. And my question was just whether that would be for those people who are in the elementary, would they just get both of those in one mailing? That's all.
So District D would get both ballots?
District D, right, would see the trustee ballot, but then they would also see the, if you went forward with the high school levy election, yeah.
You think,
Well, we are in fact already, the only thing that we know for sure we're mailing out at this point is the
I see what you're
elementary
saying.
levy. That's the only thing we know for sure, and after the 31st, we'll know whether we're mailing any people elections. And so my question really was whether it would really save as much money as we're talking about to not have to send a high school levy mailing, because it really is going primarily to all the same people who are in fact already getting an elementary levy mailing.
But that'll be paid for through the elementary district. So the high school district wouldn't pick up that part of the tab. So it would be a general fund levy election in the elementary district, and even though there's overlap, it would be fully paid for by the elementary district. And then the savings would appear in the high school district for this year. And we budget approximately $40,000 in total, so it'd probably be around $20,000 in the high school district.
I have to admit, I'm a little confused now.
If I may offer, the effect of not having an election in the high school district would mean only those that are served in our 12 elementary and middle schools, largely the city proper, would get a ballot. If we were to include running a high school levy election, then we would have ballots essentially going to the entire county with the exception of Frenchtown to vote on the high school levy. So it would be all those partner K-8 districts that feed into our high school. The voters in those districts would all be mailed a ballot. Canceling this election would mean we would not be mailing ballots to all those K-8 partner district voters.
Thanks, I was doing it backwards. Now I get it. Hellgate Elementary, Bonner, Target Range, Lolo would be a bigger
And
population.
we would not be mailing ballots to those
Right.
voters.
Okay. Any other questions now that everything's, any questions? Okay. So what the making sure that I understand, the administration is recommending that we adopt the resolution 2017-9 as that found on page 47. And its companion document, which doesn't have a number on it, which is notice of election cancellation. And so that is the recommendation of the administration, is that we approve the ballot, we approve this resolution and the companion notice of election cancellation. Is that correct?
By approval of the resolution, you're just approving the form of that notice of cancellation. So I think you can just limit it to the resolution.
Okay, okay.
Sorry,
And so the only reason that 45 is in there, which is explained, is that if someone was to make an alternative motion to actually ask that a levy be run, then we would be looking at the language that's found on page 46. Okay, well, I'll entertain any motion that any trustee wants to make then, because there's two options that are out there. Trustee Smith?
I would like to move that we move forward with the resolution authorizing cancellation of the general levy fund election, found on page 47.
Is there a second? Second by trustee Grayson. Is there any board discussion? Trustee Decker?
I am just kind of troubled by canceling the high school election and knowing that the elementary levy will be also supporting the high school, because that's just the way we do things. I know this is in comparison, it's a small amount, but the tax is also a very small amount. I guess it feels, and maybe correct me, like we're maybe being strategic in that we don't want to ask in a year where the levy amount allowed is going to be so small. And in other years, based on other things that are going on with enrollment, it would be a larger amount. Am I getting that correctly?
I think that's fair, and I think part of the rationale includes what we anticipate happening next year. And so if you describe it in that way, I think that we are looking at it overall from the amount of this levy and then also what we anticipate next year. And what Mark mentioned too, or Superintendent Thane, about the cost.
Okay, and at this point, we're doing board discussion as opposed to asking more questions. So if the administration has public comment they want to make, they can probably clarify it with that. But trustee Wake? Oh, trustee.
I guess, just to help me understand trustee Decker's question, and maybe to put this out for discussion, I think the way that I'm looking at that is, we know that the population of the high school is going to go up. The people that are going to benefit from, or the kids that we will end up supplying teachers and everything else for, is going to go up. So if we rather than run a $77,000 one this year and a $77,000 one next year, I think it is strategic. Why pay for two elections? B, why not fund it when we can get it? So I think I agree with your analysis of it. I just wanted to make sure that I tell you that that's how I'm looking at it.
Any other board discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, then there's a motion that we approve Resolution 2017-9S, which is to cancel, let me see, which is a resolution, authorizing cancellation of the general fund levy election. And we have a second in motion, and no more comment from public or board. So all those in favor of the motion, please indicate by raising their hand. And that is unanimous as to all trustees present. Thanks for helping me understand that. Then we move on to number 8, which is consideration and adoption of Resolution 2017-9E, estimating changes in revenue mills for certain funds. It looks like it's an elementary action item only. So Pat, if you can walk us through this one, which is found on page 49.
You bet. So this resolution arises out of the Senate Bill 307 and the requirement of Senate Bill 307 that school boards identify this year by April 15th of any anticipated increases in non-voted levies, and for the funds that are listed here, the Adult Education, Transportation, Tuition, and Building Reserve Fund. The additional piece to Senate Bill 307 is to allow a non-voted permissive levy for certain technology and facility improvements to that's capped at an amount that's equivalent to $100 per A and B plus $15,000. The anticipated future is that the funding would be through the state, and I think the statute references 2021. But the language of the statute or the bill that outlines proposed modifications to existing statute really incorporates this notice piece, and the deadline in the future will be March 31st for the school board to identify what they estimate to be in the form of increased preliminary or increased permissive levies, the number of mills, and the estimated tax impact. So that's what you'll see here on page 49 in the elementary. Additionally, what's required for the increases to the building reserve, this is the new part of Senate Bill 307 that allows districts to levy permissively for improvements, facility improvements, technology improvements. We've identified on the elementary side $210,000, and it's listed there under item 1, the design and engineering services associated with deferred maintenance, infrastructure, and technology improvements at the former Missoula College building. And at the beginning of the meeting, we deleted that number 2. That applies to the high school only. So that is also part of Senate Bill 307, the description of the proposed facility improvement that would be contemplated.
If I might add to Pat's discussion and narrative, and I think this goes back to Trustee Lorenzen's earlier concerns. If you look at the tuition fund, there is obviously an increase of significance on the elementary side. And I would point out that that's a vehicle that was developed by the legislature for districts to address their special education costs specifically. So there's a formula and a calculation that comes into play that we use to derive that figure that's included in the tuition fund. And it is as a result of special education students whose cost of developing educational programming exceeds what we would normally expect. To Trustee Lorenzen's point, you'll note that as well as the building reserve fund dollars that are listed are borne by the local taxpayer. And essentially, the legislature has said, we're going to give you these vehicles. The local tax dollars will support these instead of the state dollars coming into play. So, again, I understand the concern about the overall impact. The reality is that at present, the state is not funding those items, but in essence telling the locals that it's necessary for you to fund it in order to meet these excess special education costs or to support district infrastructure needs. So again, I understand from the board's perspective, certainly in the community's perspective, it's a local tax, and we understand that. Our hope, as Pat referenced earlier, is that given the way the legislation is drafted in Senate Bill 307, the state will begin to assume their share of the building reserve in the future. And we obviously hope that the same is true with special education costs, that we'll see that picked up again by the state.
Any other, have we had a motion yet? No. I didn't think so. Any other questions? Because I had one.
Could I add another comment, just
Sure.
in the context of the building reserve? We had two building reserves in the elementary district, one that was 500,000 and one that was 376,000. And both those building reserves timed out and terminated. So they haven't been levied since they expired within the last 3 years. The high school building reserve expires next year. That was a 7-year building reserve of $450,000 that will also time out or terminate. So this, in the future, may be the means by which, and hopefully with state funding, that non-bond related projects that are of some significance, because it does require them to be deferred maintenance infrastructure type projects, will be funded.
Bruns and then Trustee Smith? I think those
So we are also looking at $250,000 in transportation increase. Why is that? I thought transportation was state funded.
The state reimbursement is pretty minimal. It's primarily funded locally through the permissive levy. And so this increase is based upon an analysis by Burley and some of his folks, along with Dan Parrish, based upon where our reserves sit right now and how many bus routes that we added during the year that weren't funded initially at the beginning of the year. So, and also incorporates anticipated increases to the cost of the contract with beach transportation. So this is what's anticipated to be needed in the form of an increase to serve the to and from school transportation obligation. Burley, do you have anything to add to that?
And then Trustee Smith?
I just want to touch back on what you were saying about the building reserve, the 5-year and the 7-year that we passed 5 years ago or 6 years ago. So those increases at the time, whatever they were per 100,000, those go away. One's gone away, one will go away next year. And another question related to that is, does Senate Bill 307 require us to report when we take taxes off of people's bills?
It does not. It requires that different types of, that you create sub-funds based upon the type of projects that are performed through the building reserve. So there are state timber tech dollars that we refer to. These are state block grant money that is received, that you report that in one subcategory. You can report then these dollars in a separate subcategory, and then any voted levy in a separate category. So they're tracked as separate categories. No, they don't report. We don't report reduction.
Well, we should self-report that then, maybe.
Any other questions for Pat? Trustee Newbold?
So Pat, this is titled Resolution of Intent to Impose an Increase in Levies. So I'm understanding it to mean that these are estimates, and the reason that we pass this resolution is because we have to, by law, put the public on notice by a certain date that there may or may not be an increase in these non-voted levies. Is that right?
It's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, so this year it's April 15th, and we'll participate with the surrounding districts in a publication, a joint publication of this information, specifically of the board's intent, and they are estimates.
And so we know what the actual amounts are at what point?
We'll adopt budgets by August 24th, so that'll be the date when the specific dollar amounts are known.
Okay.
We'll also have new tax valuations at that point, which will impact the number of mills and the tax cost. Right now, we're using the most recent information from the Department of Revenue. And so that information is essentially last August tax valuations adjusted to reflect the settlement with Northwestern Energy that reduced tax valuations. So there'll be a new tax valuation next August, which is significant because that'll reduce the number, it'll likely go up, the number of mills here will go down and the tax impact will go down.
Any other questions? I had one, Pat. I know that we, at the beginning of the meeting, struck number 2 from the one that's going to be currently under consideration, and yet it's on the one that's going to be on consideration on the next agenda item. And then both of them reference the former Missoula College building. Is it of any significance, like whether Missoula College building is an elementary-owned property or a high school-owned property? Or can somehow both levies assist in, once we get it back and put it to school district use, can both levies do that?
And yes, the short answer, so what I'm anticipating is that the maintenance improvements would be shared by the elementary and the high school, so that's why you'll see it on both sides. And it's not unlike what we have happen with our administrative buildings right now. And so the support would be shared, and that's why you'll have a portion of it between the two districts.
Any other questions? Then is there a motion from an elementary trustee that we adopt that Resolution 2017-9E be adopted, which is a resolution of intent to impose an increase in levies? Is there such a motion? Moved by trustee Smith. Is there a second? Seconded by trustee Newbold. Is there board discussion? Trustee Lorenzen?
Well, again, the same concerns that we have so many vehicles for collecting additional money from the public, and this one, the public doesn't get to vote on. I like that these are earmarked amounts. They don't just feed the general fund like the operating levy would. But in summary, it's just too much money to keep asking for with all the other ways we have on the table of collecting money. And so I'm going to vote no, and it's passive aggressive, but had we not voted the levy, I could probably vote yes on this one. But it's just hits the same people over and over and over again for more money.
Thanks. Any other board discussion? Trustee Smith?
I'll just stress that the way that I'm looking at this is, it's not more, it's replacement. As I said before, when the state taketh away, then the local have to giveth to make it equal. I think as trustee Kendall had mentioned earlier, I do place these as more important than some of the other places where I think that cuts are available at the state. So if the state, I think, were holding up their end of the deal, we wouldn't see these. I think that the net cost to the taxpayer would be the same, but it's just, making us be the bad guy. But so I will be voting for this.
Any other board discussion? Trustee Decker?
I think, Mike, the point that you make that the building reserve funds no longer show up on people's tax bills after a while, it's a limited duration, and then, because people really do, I think, have the sense that it just keeps piling up more and more and more and more and more, and our tax bills do keep going up more and more. Nobody loves that. But these are all critical parts of providing the education that we've promised people that we will in Missoula, in our whole area. And, once those building reserve funds and transportation funds and specifically designated funds are gone, we still have to provide that service. And I think it's a messaging problem because people don't understand all of the I barely understand the complexities around this, and I'm working on it. So it's really complex, and how we explain to people what each stream does and for what duration is really important.
Any other board discussion? Seeing none, is there any public comment? Then this is an elementary action item, so all elementary trustees in favor of the motion to adopt Resolution 2017-9E, which is to resolution of intent to impose an increase in levies, please indicate by raising your hand. And that is trustee Smith, trustee Beers, trustee Deckard, trustee Kendall, and trustee Newbold. All those opposed? And that's trustee Lorenzen. So the motion passes. And then we move on to agenda item, just getting the number right for those watching on TV. This is for the secondary, which is 9, which is 2017-8S, which is estimating changes in revenues and mills for certain funds. And so it's pretty much the same discussion that we just had, but it is at the secondary level. Is that correct, Pat?
That's correct.
And so the numbers are, as you noted, are different just because of some different issues between high school and elementary.
Yes, that's right. So the tuition fund specifically, you'll see a 0, and that really reflects the fact that we don't have the opportunity to ask for an increase in this permissive levy. This is based upon excess special ed costs, which is a formula that's part of the statute that was put in place. It calculates what is what's reimbursed by the state and locally per student. It amounts to about $7,000, 7 to 10, depending on the district. Special education expenditures in excess of that amount fit within the tuition, the ability to levy here in the tuition fund. And so we've increased that levy. In the high school, it now stands at $500,000, which represents the last calculation that we did, the most that we could levy in that, for that purpose. The transportation fund, similar calculation that we did in the elementary. There are less route changes, so this likely reflects where the reserve sits and what's anticipated in terms of an increase to the contract for transportation. The building reserve, this is funding 2 pieces. One, the Stegner track improvement and upgrades. The other half would be funded by the elementary, not through this levy, but through a recommendation that we'll make to the board that we use some rental fund proceeds that we've accumulated. We don't have a similar option in the high school, so this presents a reasonable solution to fix that track that's in disrepair. It's right here on the Sentinel campus. And then the other piece is the corollary on the elementary, which is the design and engineering services associated with the Missoula College building. So those 2 items make up the permissive levy request there under the building reserve side.
Any questions for Pat? Yep.
I probably should have asked this on the last one, but I just want to make sure that, Pat, those estimated impacts that are listed there, those are annual numbers?
Exactly, they're annual numbers. Thank
Any
you,
other
that's a good point.
Any other questions for Pat? So, is there a motion to approve Resolution 2017-9E, which is a resolution of intent to impose an increase in levies, which is found on page 50? Moved by trustee Kendall. Is there a second? Seconded by trustee Smith. Is there any board discussion? Trustee Lorenzen? Trustee Newbold?
Did we mean 2017-8S?
Did I say it wrong?
I think.
Is that the same thing you, okay. So we're, resolution 2017-8S. Is that the right number? Okay, so that's the reference on to the document that we're voting on whether or not to approve. Thanks for that correction. Any other board discussion? Any public comment? Seeing none, all trustees in favor of approving Resolution 2017-8S, please indicate by raising your hand. And that is unanimous as to all trustees present. And thank you so much for all bearing with us through all that. And then we come on to 10, which is budget projections for 2017-2018. It's information only, Pat, and it sounds like it's a moving target until the legislature's final day.
Exactly, and the update is really reflective of what we just discussed. The elementary side, at this point in time, has an estimated increase of about $1 million with the levy of $804,000. And on the high school, an increase of $370,000 with a zero levy. As mentioned, or I believe as mentioned earlier, this contemplates the data for achievement component staying in the budget through the legislative session, and also the natural resource development payment, both state-funded pieces to the school funding puzzle. And if the data for achievement piece was removed, that would mean a reduction of the increase to the budget of $111,000 in the elementary and $77,000 in the high school. It wouldn't impact the levy in the elementary. The natural resource development payment, I want to say between the two districts is in the $280,000 range. I've got those numbers here, but the impact isn't reflected here. It doesn't change the maximum budget, doesn't change the levies. It just changes how the base budget is funded, and it would mean that it would be funded, if the natural resource development payment was removed, it'd be funded to a greater extent by guaranteed tax base aid, which is state funded, and then by the district local taxpayers, between those two pieces. The remaining information it's fluid. We will continue to look at the number of retirees, which will impact the savings that's reflected there. We always look at those estimates, the staffing estimates. We'll continue to look at those. We'll look at those at the end of this fiscal year to see if how our estimates carried forward through the year, and make minor adjustments to those, so that can happen. The classroom staff obligation in the elementary, based very preliminarily, this is a 3 staff increase, and then a minimal number of other increases that you'll see there that are listed. One is to insurance, just reflects our property liability insurance increase in premium, and our SRO, CRO obligation, which is minimal this year. That's probably all I was going to report on that, if there are any questions.
Are there any questions for Pat? I'm sure we'll be talking about this budget for many meetings to come.
We will.
Anything else? Any public comment on this information-only item? So as I indicated, we take public comment on non-agenda items at the beginning and end of every meeting. So we've reached number 9, which is public comment on non-agenda items. If anyone, usually if anyone wasn't able to get here at the beginning of the meeting, was able to come at the end, we would love to hear from you. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, then we're done.
If I may.
Oh, yes, public comment.
I was remiss when I did my superintendent's report, but I would like to include that the Native Youth Powwow will be held at Sentinel High School in the cafeteria Saturday, which is, I believe, April 2nd. And the grand entry will be at 6 p.m. So again, that's open to the public. And we appreciate the work of our Indian education staff and our Native American specialists and all the work they do with the Native community to support Native youth through our annual powwow. So I would encourage you, if you're available, consider attending.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing
May
none, we're
I?
done.
I was just going to remind trustees to sign a few of these resolutions if they could. Thank you.
Okay, so we're done. Thank you so much for your patience.